Welcome to Project Book Club, where UFOs and UAP have close encounters with morning coffee. Grab a fresh mug and enjoy our steaming hot takes on this month's book that deals with anomalous phenomena. Brand new, classic, and often controversial. We talk about the ideas and we read between the lines. Now here's Bryce Zabel in Hollywood and Chrissy Newton in Toronto.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 3 of Project Book Club. And we've been, so far, read 2 autobiographies that have been really unbelievable. One that was based and written by somebody, Roth Blumenthal, a New York Times journalist, who wrote about John Mack. And then on our second episode, if you did watch that, we got into Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. So, Bryce, what book are we talking about this time around?
Well, we're doing by the way, here's looking at you. Always got to show the colors, the flying colors. Now, you don't have them right now, though, because I'm betting. Oh, you do? You have?
But I have something better.
Okay.
Not better, but I would say just in substitute. I have an Aladdin cup.
What could be better than a Project Book Club cup? And by the way, I heard you almost say Project Blue Book, which I did in our first episode. So we were too clever by half with our title, I think. But it's great to see you. And I can only say that doesn't look like your office. So you are not in your office, and you may not even be in Toronto. What's going on?
No, I'm not. I am in Wisconsin, and I'm in Milwaukee, to be exact. I was asked to go on a media trip to tour and learn about Milwaukee, the amazing state. I was like, I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. When I flew in, I was like, okay, I know about beer and cheese. That's really
Laverne and Shirley. That's what I know. Laverne and Shirley. Happy Days.
Right?
Yeah.
The Fonz.
Yeah.
The Fonz. Apparently, I think a friend of mine said that 70s show was supposed to be based out of Wisconsin. So I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know the Fonz was from there. But when I flew in and then drove into Milwaukee, when I got my rental car, I was just blown away by the architecture. It's so clean. The people are amazing. And there is this, as being a Canadian, there's this similarities with us when it comes to somewhat of the culture because of our Great Lakes. It's off Lake Michigan. So I was really based around Lake Michigan through Milwaukee. I went to a planetarium. I went to Yerkes Observatory that's been around since 1987. Like, unbelievable. I got to watch the dome open of the observatory with this telescope that's been there from 1987. The original, has only been updated in the 60s. And it was like time traveling. It was unbelievable. And then they let me close the dome, which was amazing. It's like the dome shutter. And so I have it. If anyone wants to see it, you can go to my Twitter or my Instagram and you can take a look there. But it was just, Milwaukee's so beautiful. So I went to a planetarium and then I went out by Sheboygan. Don't you love the name Sheboygan?
It just rolls off the tongue so brilliantly. I do love that.
So I was out by Sheboygan, and I went to the Maritimes, the Wisconsin Maritimes Museum, where I learned about multiple different shipwrecks that have happened in the 1800s within the Great Lakes. And then also was on the USS Colby, which was a World War II submarine, and took a tour of that. And again, all of it's on my Instagram. But And then after that, the last thing I did before I jumped on a plane is I went kayaking in the Great Lakes in Michigan, Lake Michigan.
Good for you.
Not much.
World traveler, you. That just sounds like so much fun. I've been to Wisconsin. I like Wisconsin, but my 2 connections are my brother Alan, my older brother Alan, went to school there in Milwaukee. And all I remember is some very, very cold winters that he endured and wrote us about. Apparently it can get pretty chilly up there in the winter. And also, one of my very close friends is Don Most, or Donnie Most, as most people know him, from Happy Days. He was Ralph Malph on Happy Days. And Don is a real UFO aficionado himself. He and I have worked on a couple of UFO projects. And in fact, I cast him in Dark Skies as, if you can believe this, Timothy Leary.
So, no way.
So Don, I sort of thought, well, people think he's got that funny Happy Days thing. So maybe if I give him this serious role of Timothy Leary, he'll sort of bring some of that craziness to it. So he was Timothy Leary in The Summer of Love, did a great job. And I also cast him as a death-obsessed researcher in The Crow. So Don and I are close, and we talk UFOs all the time. He's a Roswell aficionado, as am I, and we've we get it on that. Now, you asked, though, just to get back here, this is the book, ladies and gentlemen, Encounters by, she calls herself D.W. Pasulka on the book cover, but doesn't everybody really know her as Diana?
Yeah, Diana Pasulka. I think most people know her as a Diana, which I think is really lovely because she's so personable, right? This is one of the things, is that Diana loves to talk about this topic. She's one of the first females, too, that has written about this from an academic perspective. And correct me if I'm wrong, and we know that UFO Twitter will do that.
You think? Yeah, they might.
Right.
They might.
But I believe she was the first academic to cover this topic and write a book on it. But I know she's at least one of the first, if not the first, that took this so wholeheartedly seriously.
And of course, this Encounters is her second book. The one where she really rang the bell and got on the national conversation was her first book, American Cosmic, which introduced us to, let me see, Gary Nolan was a character in that book, although he was not known as Gary Nolan in the book. And then there's another, she uses characters who have been given names. So in the first book, it was Tyler D., and he makes an appearance in the second book as well. It's kind of like, I don't know, is it On the Road, Jack Kerouac? I don't know, it's like she's got this collection of characters that she meets in this thing, which makes it kind of an unusual nonfiction book. There's a character in this one called the Gray Man, I believe. And, it's interesting. So I don't know. Before we get into the nitty gritty of it all, why don't you just give us an update on exactly who Diana Pasulka is, that she's writing a book like this?
Yeah, she's a writer. She's obviously a UFO researcher, but she's a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. And so we were saying before, Tyler, who's our producer here, is from North Carolina. I think everyone's from North Carolina, apparently. And the one who shall not be named, Sean Kirkpatrick, is also from North Carolina.
Call him Voldemort. I'm telling you, Voldemort works better for Sean.
Well, Voldemort is from North Carolina, but there's so many different academics, and we find that are in North Carolina, and so many people that love this topic deeply. Micah Hanks from the Debrief, who works with myself, he is from that area. So many people are from it. And I was saying before, when we were not recording, that sometimes when I go to conferences and I talk, or I'm out there just chatting with people in the UAP space, I always laugh because I'm like, where are you from? They'll put up their hand and ask a question. I'm like, where are you from? And I'm like, let me guess, you're probably from North Carolina.
Yeah. Wow.
So
I mean, Diana is, I guess she specializes in Catholic religious history, but it's kind of interesting because I guess the way I would put it is, the pretext of the books is that religious studies often reflect UFO events, and UFO events are often reflected as religious studies and all that. Here's the thing. If I'm completely 100%, well, first of all, Chrissy, I would just have to say it's hard to put yourself in judgment of some other person's work, whether it be a movie review, which I've done in my career, or book reviews as we're doing now, because you can really like something and at the same time not think it's perfect. And you also know how much effort goes into making a movie, a television series, or a book, and you don't want to be the critical person. That is kind of what we set ourselves up for. And it's interesting. As I read this book, and again, I go back and forth. I'm either reading the hardcover or I'm reading the Kindle. But at the same time, I also listened to several of her interviews. I mean, she's been everywhere. She's been on Joe Rogan. She's been on Sean Ryan, I think, and several others. And I really like her. I like her vibe. I would like to hang out with her. She sounds like a really friendly person. I think there is one thing for me about the book, and I'll just lay this out here, and I'd love to get your thought about it. And then we'll get into breaking down some of the specifics. Is it's full of really interesting things that some of them I've thought about all my career, and other things I haven't thought about at all. And it got me thinking about them. But the problem for me about reading the book is it doesn't quite seem to build dramatically as much as I want it to. And I went back to her American Cosmic and found something she had written. I just want to read this now, and it kind of explains what I was thinking. She says, as a scholar of religion, I am trained not to weigh in one way or the other on the truth or falseness of believers' claims. When looking at the documentation, of the presentation of a belief, there is no need to consider whether the belief is justified or not if one is analyzing its social effects and influence. And you know what, Chrissy, I think that's probably true. There probably is no need to do that. But for me, it made it a little less satisfying as a book. I kind of wanted her to give a little more direction to it. It feels a little episodic. Okay, now here's my friend. This person believes this, and they told me that. And now we're going on to somebody else without sort of tying it up or saying, this is why it's all building to one thing. I kind of missed some of the build in it, which again, like I said, she sounds like a very interesting person. I would like to hang out with her. She passes the would you want to have a beer with somebody test. Absolutely, I would. She's probably fascinating like yourself and be fun to do that. But as a read itself, you have to be prepared for that. So I would just say, if you're going to read Encounters, folks, or if you've already read it, then you may know this. For some people, it probably works perfect. You know, for some people, they go, well, I don't need to be led around. I don't need to be told what to think. But I sort of missed her in the book. Even though it's very personal about her meeting people, I missed her sort of reacting to the people, sort of. Does that make any sense, or is that?
It makes total sense. I agree. There's so many testimonials. There was obviously some academic undertones to it, right? She speaks a lot heavily about the esoteric world and uses a lot of academics in that spirit, in that place, from Jacques Vallée to J. Allen Hynek, that are wonderful references. But I had, outside of enjoying the book, because it was something different than what we were reading before, outside of kind of autobiographies, this was a very different take. But I agree, she was missed out in it. But sometimes I would get her confused with the tense, or if it was I, because she would sometimes go into I statements when she was talking about testimonies. So she was speaking about what someone would say to her through their experience and their lens. But then sometimes I would get confused, where I was like, hold on, is this Diana Pasulka saying this? Is this her and her experiences, or is this somebody else? And then, I'd read on a little bit, trying to distinguish the two. And then it would give a little hint where I'd be like, well, she told me this, and it would go back in. So that's where I had a real trouble, was distinguishing between who was Diana Pasulka and who was the reference that she was speaking with, or the friend or person that she was referencing through her stories or experiences with them. So I wish that was a little bit different or a little bit clearer.
That is, I hadn't even thought of that until we talked about it just before going on. And I went, yeah, that is true. I kind of understand it in a way. I'm writing my own memoir-ish book, I guess. And one of the things is, you don't want to sound like a flaming egotist. I this, I that. So, you want to be cool and calm about it. And so you tend to want to go, how can I do this without, stepping too far in front of the story? But honestly, if you're involved in it, you need to. You should own the perspective. So I don't know what caused her to make those choices. Maybe creatively she thought that was the right thing. But I will tell you something that I love about the book, though. I've read a lot of UFO books, as have you, or else we wouldn't be having Project Book Club, right? I mean, we're doing it because we enjoy reading these things and we enjoy thinking about them. And as you said, our first one was a biography of John Mack, and our second was an autobiography of Lou Elizondo. This one's not that. This is a number of different people who sort of enter her research life. But, and this is the part that makes it kind of stand out, in an accessible way, she is talking about some of the big issues that leave me asleep, waking up from being asleep in the middle of the night and go, wait a minute. And among them are a couple of things that I think are very fascinating. One is she talks about the numinous, and which I wasn't even aware of that word. That's Numinous, the numinous. And she says the numinous is the feeling of being in the presence of awesome power, which is simultaneously mysterious, dreadful, fascinating, and difficult to describe. And I kind of love that, because if there's anything about today's UFO world, it's trying to square the numinous with the technologist of the whole thing. And it's obviously exists on both levels. And I think that's what she's really saying in this book. And in fact, to give it even more credence, she says she's been to crash sites and that she has seen crash wreckage that she's described. And to be quite honest with you, if she devoted the entire book to going to crash wreckage and seeing the crash wreckage material, that might have been a book. Instead, it's really just kind of lightly dealt with and moving on. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I love her perspective, though, too. Just for someone who really does love religion and philosophy, I personally like it. And I really like to dabble in learning about the esoteric to a degree. I'm not immensely involved in the esoteric compared to some people who really are involved in that community. Obviously, I'm more in UAP, but it surrounds it. So it's interesting to hear. And we hear people like from Jacques Vallée to so many others that really got it started in the UFO topic because of esoteric questions or experiences. So I think she does really hit on that very well, and she does blend those worlds together really well. But she also blends academics. Like, I'll go into Aya Whitley, if I'm saying her name correctly. She's a PhD.
I'm going with Whiteley, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and a PhD in space psychology. She's works with multiple astronauts. I met her at the First Sol. She spoke there. She's this beautiful, wonderful psychologist that looks at the UFO topic as an academic as being serious. And so the question I have for, Aya, and I have interviewed her, thankfully, on my own podcast, and, is really how many people has she's interviewed, from astronauts to all different pilots that have had these. And she has a real heart and worry for people that are seeing things that are unidentified, right? And how it's affecting them in an emotional capacity, and how it's affecting their work and their life. But what I really like how Diana starts off with the book within the First Academic is she focuses on Aya and how the overview effect from space, when astronauts go to space, and how when they see this, which is very current to today in Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, recent launch, and how people end up seeing Earth from outer space and how it changes their entire life, the way their worldview. And outside of thinking that, and some astronauts, don't get me wrong, have this experience as positive, but a lot have come back having these really negative feelings and these horrible feelings, and being, thrilled when they see Earth from another perspective, but also being very scared. There's a fear that comes up. There's a missing, there's a longing. And then when they come back to Earth and have this form of decompression, the overview effect takes over. Previous astronauts I has talked about, where they go into some of the first astronauts that have come back on missions have gone into like self-deprivation kind of tanks, and they have been isolated from their families, but then they're also going through all these emotions. And some of them, unfortunately, have turned to alcohol and have gone through multiple divorces after seeing that, after having these experiences. So it's very interesting in how Diana Pasulka, and I would like to ask Diana Pasulka why she started with
this overview effect is really pretty fascinating. I mean, I hope that we can find this clip and insert it right here. But William Shatner, Captain Kirk, went up, I believe, on one of those things, came back down, and he was clearly suffering post-traumatic overview effect when he came back, right? And it was fascinating just to see how a guy who you'd think has spent his entire life thinking about space, given his roles that he's played, and yet there he is, overwhelmed by, this 5-minute flight. So very interesting. The overview effect, by the way, is just sort of, I guess it's the experience of seeing Earth from a distance, if you will, yes. Where and where you realize the inherent unity of, it's sort of like, I think it was Carl Sagan that first talked about the little blue marble or whatever. Somebody did. And it is kind of incredible. From our perspective here on the planet, we think, it's my neighbor's ruining my view in my backyard kind of thing. We're very, we're living a local life. But you get out in space and you see how precious the Earth is. It kind of changes things. Now, you brought up Dr. Aya Whiteley, and you brought up some interesting things about her. But the thing, I end up on my Kindle making little highlights of things. And then before we do this show, I go back and read what I thought was an interesting highlight. And for hers, I didn't highlight what you said. I highlighted something else where she had said something about, as astronauts get further and further from the Earth, they would form their own rules, beliefs, and behaviors, and at times, without any discussion, would form an understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. and those rules and behaviors would drastically differ from those of the society they left behind. And frankly, I find that fascinating because, of course, if we start sending astronauts to Mars and beyond in the future, humans, the further out you get, the less connected you are to the home planet, and you start thinking differently. And it's funny because, listen, I've been at this game long enough. I have 100 half-done scripts out there. And one of them was literally, I wrote a thing called I was writing, I never finished it, something called Escape Velocity, about a group of astronauts on a long journey. And literally their order just breaks down. Everybody starts having sex with everybody else. Everybody starts fighting with people. It's just the whole thing becomes chaos. They're supposed to be these people who we see up in orbit who are very mission oriented and all that. But I think it is true. I think human beings being what they are, the further out you get, the more you're going to say, don't try to tell me what to do. I'm the guy living this thing. I'll take care of it myself. Thank you very much. So I found, I guess when I say that I really enjoyed the book, that's part of why I enjoyed it, is that there were just things like that just sort of popped up. And if anything, again, going back to that initial comment, I kind of wanted to know more and why that necessarily led into the next thing. But quite often in this book, the next thing just happens. You just go from the thing that you're doing to the next thing. And He doesn't really tell you how to feel or any of that. And again, I can see if we had her on and we were interviewing Diana, she would probably say, well, yeah, that's the point of the book. But it kind of left me a little at sea a few times.
Yeah, having a little bit more connection. There's one thing that I've noticed as a theme from the beginning of the book, and Aya's, talks about this, is the idea of that we already know. There's this intrinsic knowing, right? And every person that I believe Diana spoke to throughout her journey in her life around the UFO topic really all agreed with this one kind of subject that we already know. And there's this an internal knowing. And there's like this internal kind of download or just knowing that we have to tap into. And I would say, I'm assuming, Bryce, you've had these experiences too, where you're great at your job, you innately are just good at being a writer. And so I think and for me, it was the same thing when I started in public relations. I just kind of knew how to do it. I went to school for it, but when I went to school, I already kind of just knew I was naturally doing it. So there was this innate knowing. Obviously, you can always learn more. Like there's part of it, but I think there is an innateness that happens. And she really talks about this, and Aya talks about it too, is knowledge that is already knowing, that I wrote down here as kind of that quote in the book. And everyone else touches on that, which I think is really interesting, especially in the esoteric space, right? But it's interesting that with Aya starting as an academic and more of a psychologist kind of leans into that too, where there's this personal understanding and knowing that enwraps us all. And we probably should listen to it more and follow it more. And I do truly believe that. Yeah.
I'm with you on that. And just to finish up the sort of a literally big picture. I mean, it's not just me saying it's a big picture. She's talking about that overview effect, the big picture effect. And she also talks about what is called the transformative power of awe, AWE, awe. And she says, and this is from the book, awe can transform people and reorient their lives, goals, and values. Given the stability of personality and values, awe-inducing events may be one of the fastest and most powerful methods of personal change and growth. So to me, that's another reason this book is special, in that rarely in a UFO book are you sort of talking about how people are transforming in the face of this knowledge. And that seems to be something she's very interested in talking about. And it really struck home to me that when I was reading that part, because I think I'm kind of a John Lennon aficionado with his sighting in New York City that happened in August of 1973. And right after John Lennon saw his UFO, and I won't belabor the story, maybe some other time I'll tell it, but what he said afterwards, I thought was so fascinating. Within a week of seeing it, he said in an interview, if the masses started to accept UFOs, it would profoundly affect their attitudes toward life, politics, everything. It would threaten the status quo. Whenever people come to realize that there are larger considerations than their own petty little lives, they are ripe to make radical changes on a personal level which would eventually lead to a political revolution in society as a whole. And if you take those two things together and you start to go, regardless of disclosure, official capital D disclosure, we're in the middle of this transformation of awe, because more and more people are seeing the reality of the phenomenon, whether the government wants to admit it or not, and whether officials are talking about it. And there is the possibility, and God knows we need it, folks. God knows we need it. We need the transformation of awe. We need people to understand that we're not the center of the universe necessarily here, and that we need to start thinking about the larger picture. So I did find it profound. I guess that's the thing. From time to time, I would stop and go, okay, that is very profound, right? And I think any book that makes you do that is a good book.
It is, and there were so many moments within philosophy that I loved, like Plato's, cave mention. We're talking about how, we're probably living in this space, potentially living in this space where, we have these kind of, let's just say, puppet masters or people that are controlling what we're seeing, and we just don't want to believe it. And that really does represent society. We don't want to believe it. We don't want to see what's maybe behind that curtain. And we'll fight each other when somebody's maybe trying to show us the truth. And we are living that. And I think that's always been consistent in philosophy. And gosh, how long ago was Socrates and Plato? Like, it's been so long that we're still... and I love that even the academics that she speaks with, we're looking at those references and looking at them in a new light within the early 2000s and saying like, well, maybe this was actually what they meant, because people weren't taking it literally. They were like, oh, this is probably just some kind of, reference or analogy or something to that degree. It wasn't actually something that could be a literal statement. And from how Donna is perceiving it now, that this was maybe just, Plato and Socrates and the rest of these philosophers really saying, wake up, because if you don't take control of your life or take control of this, other people will, and we'll be living in a cave and we'll never really get to see what the outside world really looks like. And I think she does a fabulous job there.
I don't know anything about Plato or Socrates other than sort of, maybe that much. I'm like a half an inch deep on those guys. However, that's kind of the point of this book. She talks a lot about Plato. And part of the reason she's doing that is because she is saying these ideas and these feelings are timeless. They've been with us for a long time. This isn't something that started in 1947. And in fact, she's saying, go ask the Catholic Church. They'll tell you, right, that it's been around for a long time. So, and interestingly enough, in terms of the transformation and awe and the overview effect and what they say, the numinous and all that, she also talks about, she doesn't make this super specific, but she talks about, hey, we all have the internet right now. I mean, you and I couldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the internet. And frankly, even if we did, nobody would be paying attention to it if they didn't have the internet to watch it, right? So we know what the internet is. It's a big connector of us. But one of the things she's arguing in this book is there is an organic network, that somehow consciousness out there, tell me if I get this, if I misstate this, but she seems to be saying that there is an organic consciousness network somehow that people can tap into. That's why some people get downloads, right? That's why some things that seem like they're coincidences might not be, because we're all part of an organic network of thought and thinking that may even exist outside of space-time. So again, these are the kind of big ideas where you go, okay, let me get this straight. So we're all sharing a consciousness, we're outside of space-time, and then you go, I think I need to go down to McDonald's and get a ice cream cone or something, just to bring yourself back to reality. I mean, some of this stuff is heavy stuff.
Well, the question is time, in our experience localized?
Right.
Right. And I think if you look at materialistic scientists would say that, consciousness, what happens within the brain and within your own brain. And then some scientists would be like, no, there's something else that are larger. Like Julia Mossbridge, for example, who is a neuroscientist, would say that, I would imagine, would believe that there is something more going on. And this is what kind of Diana Pasulka is saying, that there is this type of network, right? And that consciousness is, we feel that we're creating consciousness potentially, but creating this is maybe we're tapping into consciousness, right? That's the other question. And we don't really know. And nobody really knows what consciousness is, but our localized reality experience from a quantum level means that there isn't anything that's localized. We're not localized, and we're in multiple different places at the same time. And that's thanks to quantum physics, right? That tells us that. But when we look at these interconnected networks, we look at things like the mycelium network, right? We see that within plants. We see that within the mushroom, the fungi community. It's interconnected, right? Within the environment, and it's communicating with itself, right? On that type of network. So why would it be so hard to believe that we might have something like that?
Now you are totally freaking me out, because I have seen every episode of The Last of Us where that fungi network is taking down humanity. And I know to be very, very nervous about that. But you're right. I mean, we aren't everything. We just aren't everything. I saw the Jurassic Park movie last night with my family, and there's somebody who gives a speech saying something like, 99.99% of all the species that have ever lived on the earth are extinct. We've been around 200,000 years as human beings, and the dinosaurs were here for 174 million. Now, I haven't checked their work on that screenplay, but I'm sure it's something like that. So you got to have a little bit of humility to be a human being, too. There is a lot going on. Anyway, let's talk Jacques Vallée. He's in the book. He's a big character. You know him personally. What's your connection to Jacques again? And then we'll get into hers.
Yeah, I've known Jacques for, I think about 3 years now. It could be 4. Maybe it's 4 years. But I've worked with him. I did the public relations with him on Trinity. And then I did his recent book. I did the PR with, booking him on Joe Rogan and multiple other podcasts and stuff that Jacques has done for the past couple of years doing public relations. And funny enough, I've even gotten to speak about him, which I feel like so grateful that on Ancient Aliens, they did the Jacques Vallée segment and they asked me to talk about him. And I was like, what an honor. I told Jacques, is that okay with you that they asked that? And he said, yes, for sure. And I said, okay.
Sure he did.
But I just felt so honored because there's so many other people that have known Jacques his whole life. And I just feel that I was very lucky that they asked me. And let's be honest, they interviewed a lot of other people that know Jacques, but I'm just happy that they even clipped me in. Because it's just such an honor to have that memory where people will watch a piece, a snippet, an episode about how wonderful that man is, and being able to be one of those people that speak well of him. And I call him a BFG, to be honest. He's like a big friendly giant. He's wonderful.
He is. And I'm very grateful to you personally, because thanks to you, I got to go have lunch with him at his home in San Francisco. And before I get into any of that, the reason that's important is that I'm reading her book about her going to have lunch with Jacques Vallée at his place in San Francisco.
Yes.
And I have to say, I got giddy at the thought of, wait, I'm going to see Jacques Vallée and he's having lunch. I mean, it was so charming and wonderful to have Jacques and his lovely wife presenting me with a lovely lunch. I went with my wife, Jackie, and we first of all, as she pointed out, talking about the overview effect. You go to Jacques Vallée's apartment, he's got this view of San Francisco that is, I've never even seen it. Even if you went to top of buildings and, that were view buildings, you probably wouldn't quite have this. It's phenomenal. And of course, he is the guy who has tried to bridge the technological with the bigger picture that she talks about in Encounters. And I found that to be really, first of all, as you said, he's a big friendly giant. He's a great guy. I think of him as a lion in the winter because he's up there in age right now. Not that I get to make that comment about too many people anymore, but he is, and he's gained this wonderful reputation. Everybody likes Jacques. Everybody wants to talk to him about how he's the guy going back to the 60s who said, yeah, look, there is technology and there is nuts and bolts, but there is something very, very important that is beyond that is at play, which is the consciousness angle and all of that. And in her book, she says, I think she quotes Jacques as saying, I think we're dealing with something that is both technological and psychic and seems to be able to manipulate other dimensions. Now, I remember reading that from Jacques Vallée in the 60s or 70s with some of his earlier books. I didn't read them at the time. I sort of picked them up more in the 80s or 90s. And that was shocking, because if you think about the way that the world has evolved in ufology, it has been, first, it was hard for us to believe there were things flying around in the sky. Then it was impossible to believe that there were people that had been abducted. Then it was impossible to believe that there were crash retrievals, and impossible to believe there's consciousness, all of that. And yet what Jacques did that she gives him credit for is he didn't want to talk to just everybody. He wanted to talk to people usually who hadn't told their stories in the press, right? He wanted to go sit down with these people and say, please just tell me your story. And the extreme and high strangeness he kept encountering is what made him form these opinions that when he first began expressing them in the 60s and 70s made him an outlier, but I think right now put him right in the center of the debate.
Yeah, it's funny because like being firsthand and spending time at Jacques Vallée's like unbelievable space, right? The view is like amazing. I sat with lunch with him too. And I asked him, the things that he said to Dinah Pasulka were similar, that he made comments when we were speaking, like interviewing people face to face, spending time with them, going back the next day and having lunch, but creating this connection, and that is so important. That's very Jacques Vallée. He has a deep love for people. He has a deep love for humanity. And I think that's what separates him compared to some academics that care more about the data than they care about people. And I truly believe that you don't have any data if you don't have people experiencing it, right? Data comes from us. We also are our own internal sensors, right? So you need people to be able to analyze data and to talk about their experiences. Why testimonies are so important. But one thing that Jacques told me, though, at lunch myself with him, is I asked him, I said, do you think that of all of your writings and talking about things that are interdimensional or what this could be, do you still believe that theory to this day? And he said, no. And I went, oh. Then I said, then what do you believe? And he said, I believe that we don't even know. Like we just don't know. We're not there yet. And we're not even like in the beginning of it. And I thought that was fascinating from a man that knows so much and really thinks that we just maybe have scratched the surface. And it took me back. I wasn't expecting him to say that, to be honest.
It takes me back.
Yes, yeah. But it does make sense for a man that's been around this for so long and has looked at this in so many different ways. I think he thinks that this is just the infancy of it and very beginning of its own life.
I know we're here to talk. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, but I do now. I wasn't thinking that, but thinking about it now, he's more than likely probably right. And yeah.
I definitely think so. Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek in the I know we're here to talk about Diana's book, but he is part of her book, so that's sort of why we're going here. In the 1970s, Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek sort of started talking about what they called the invisible college, which I'm not 100% sure exactly what that meant, but I think it meant that the people who are interested in this kind of obscure paranormal debate couldn't talk about it in a real visible way without suffering career suicide and various other things. So they had a lot of these conversations that you and I are having right now and other people are having publicly. They had them privately.
Right. They had to because of the ridicule. They weren't. Right. Now we're allowed to kind of have these discussions, even in the academic community. But the invisible college was, you would be shunned from the academic community, and you, like John Mack, probably could have gotten even any of your, working at Harvard or anything like that when it comes to his academics taken away from him, right?
To jump back to Diana's book, though, she uses a term called the invisibles in her book, and it's not to be confused with the Invisible College. In her first book, American Cosmic, she started talking about the Fight Club. And I think that's why she named one of these people that she was one of her sources, Tyler D, because I think that comes from Fight Club mythology or character. And she probably got some threats or feedback, or like, you can't call it Fight Club or we'll sue you kind of thing, because now she's pivoted and calling the same thing the Invisibles. But the Invisibles, I believe, are they're the secret keepers, I guess, who safeguard the secrecy of whatever it is that either the Catholic Church knows or the government knows or the gatekeepers know or whatever. Those she now refers to as the Invisibles, which is what I thought was really fascinating, Chrissy, because while there is all this big picture, mind-blowing kind of what is really going on stuff, at the same time, she's quite clear in part of this book that the further she got embedded with UFO cultures, the more she started realizing that there was an organized push among people to disinform and misinform. And I found that pretty interesting because I've had my own brush with those kinds of, that kind of resistance. And so she goes into that a lot. She's very clear that if you kick over the rock of the phenomenon to look around and see what's underneath it, you end up also making yourself a target of people that seem to be paid to disinform and misinform, which is, by the way, something Jacques Vallée was saying in his very early books as well. And it's something I've always said as well. I've said to people when they ask me about my various experiences, particularly the dark skies one, I say, look, I can't prove that UFOs are real. I mean, I'm not a scientist, and I haven't had my own personal experience, and I'm not analyzing crash wreckage or anything. So I can't prove that to you. I can tell you about cases and all that, but I can prove to you that somebody is trying to disinform us about it, because that's happened to me. And I think that's what she's saying. I think that's what Jacques Vallée has been saying. And I find that a very interesting part of her book for me personally, because what that means is, okay, it can't both be not real and real enough that you have to pay billions of dollars to disinform people about it. You know, that doesn't square logically. So yeah, there is a phenomenon, and we know it, not necessarily always by our encounters with it, but by the pushback from various folks to acknowledging it. I guess the latest example of that would be the Wall Street Journal articles, a couple of them, that tried to basically say, listen, folks, all that stuff you've heard about UFOs over the years and all that stuff, it turns out that the government was lying to you, not about the existence of non-human intelligence, but about their misinformation campaign. And so that's the new pushback. The new pushback is to say, we made it all up.
Well, exactly. But even if we look at in the 60s, you know, the Robertson panel, the Condon report, right there is proof on its own through documentation that there was a CIA program to discredit anybody or to silence anybody who was talking about UFOs.
Yeah.
So right there, and recommendations on how to do it, first of all, to create this. So when people say to me, you know, why would the U.S. government do that? You know, we had multiple pilot sightings from that. I understand that this was during the Cold War we were looking at too. There's many reasons to be worried about that. And in case a UFO was mistaken, was caught to be, you know, on some type of radar, and they thought it was Russia or they thought it was the States, and somebody decides to press the button. I get it. National security perspective makes a lot of sense. But the recommendations you can see ended up working. You know, we saw it throughout the 90s and the 80s and the 90s, and specifically in the 90s with tabloids. You know, Bill Clinton, you know, talks with George Bush, hangs out with alien. Like all of this discrediting.
Wait, that didn't happen?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Crushing my dreams. Okay, continue. Yeah.
But there was so much of that created ridicule and just silenced people because they would call them crazy. So we've seen that, and to me that is just evidence alone, right? Pointing that there has been cover-ups, and we do see it. The question now is, I think that most of us think and believe or agree, I should say, outside of believe, agree that there is something going on and we don't know what it is. The question is how much do they know and how much of it is our tech? And that has been the debate now. I think the debate is it real? It's like, oh no, there's something happening, but how much does the American government really know? And are they using disinformation? Because let's just, for example, in the Washington Journal, the government's not lying when they say that they've used UFO programs or things like that in context as disinformation, because that's actually not illegal. Right. You can't do it to your people, but you can do it to your internal teams, and you can do it to people that work for the government. You can create this information so that there isn't the sharing of information for national security. That's totally legal. So it doesn't mean that they haven't done it. The question is what programs are maybe fake that they're saying, and which ones are real. So this whole clouding of it is a tactic, right? It's a form of fire hosing too. We see that they do that, right? So what are they covering up, and what do we know, and what is real and what isn't, is really where we're at right now. And it's so important that we have to live in a world like this, and why we all have to get together as civilians and ask these questions and not have trust. And then the American government or governments around the world ask, well, why don't you trust us? And it's like, well, because of reasons.
Don't get me started. Yeah. Listen, hopefully that world is cracking, and we'll see a different world emerge from it. But one of the things that Diana Pasulka points out in her book Encounters is she talks about the oral tradition. And that basically just means talking through these traditions. And it's something that people, whether they've been Native Americans or Aboriginals or other Native peoples around the world, much of what the information they've passed on over the years has been through the oral tradition. And what's ironic is that if you think about the actual secrecy standards that the intelligence community uses, I forget who's responsible for this quote, but the quote was nothing in writing. So in other words, a lot of important meetings happen and nobody takes notes on them. It's all done verbally. And that's why, in addition to the fact that documents can be shredded or burned or redacted or whatever, but a lot of original documents never got created in the first place. A lot of this most serious stuff is never written down. So one of the things that she points out is there's a UFO history that can never be known, as she puts it, or can only be known by those in the right place at the right time. The oral tradition of UFOs is more important than what is written about them. So then she talks about, and this was, I think, maybe my favorite part, because I actually know about another true case like this that I won't get into right now because I'm not prepared to pull up all the facts in my head. But she talks about an invisible, in other words, somebody who was involved in the keeping of this information. But she talks about it from the point of view of a woman who was the child of an invisible, who ended up watching that person just be very shady about what was going on, who she talked to, and what he did. And the thing that I thought was again, this is the one that I ended up highlighting because I just thought this is so darned interesting. She said there's a joke that her father and his friends often exchanged in conversation. They would use the word simulacrum. I hope I pronounced this right. Simulacrum. Do you know how that's pronounced?
No, but I think that makes sense. It sounds about
right.
accurate.
So she says, here's what she said they would do. They'd be having a conversation in like a dinner party or a barbecue in the backyard. And one of them would drop the word into the middle of the conversation as if it were a joke, right? And the others would repeat it as a reminder to themselves, as she said, that they had to keep up the pretense, right? That they were living in a world that wasn't exactly real, that there was this other world, but in the backyard at the barbecue or at the dinner party, they had to keep up the other world. And that is something that our friend Richard Dolan's been talking about for years. He calls it the breakaway civilization rather than the invisibles. But the idea that there are people out there who know a whole lot, but they don't talk about it, not to you and me. So the fact that there's any intelligence people coming forward at this point in our history is kind of a big deal, because it's like a secret society. It's like a cult.
It is. There's been so many secret societies. Why can't we say the intelligence community isn't one either? Jacques Vallée said something to me that was very interesting too. The halls within Washington is for trading secrets. I was like, that makes sense. Makes sense, right? Makes sense that would be the element. There is a quote, though, that I love in the book, too. The battlefield is a space of equality and enlightenment. And what she's referencing that as saying that Diana Pasulka, I'm forgetting if it's Tyler who made the quote, where she's referencing the book who said that, but she's saying that she would take she chooses or would choose to take a passive seat in how to fight equality within this space and knowledge and enlightenment. And she used to think about taking a passive. But I believe it was Tyler within the book, or one of the people are saying, no, this is a battlefield. We have to fight. We have to come prepared to fight and to battle, because if we don't fight and we will lose our form of equality, which is obviously one of the most important things that we need and have to fight for in this world, is our own individual equality and being equal to among each other, and along with enlightenment, being able to learn more and have more knowledge. And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, a lot of people don't have that ability sometimes to focus on things that they would consider to be enlightenment. Because of Maslow's hierarchies of needs, you're focusing on housing and your needs for that. And at the top is enlightenment, where you get to stop, and because you're protected, and really do think about the world and the environment you are and ask these questions. So with that said, why do we think that people that are wealthier are able to have these? Because the Maslow hierarchy of needs are already accomplished for them. Some people, when they're entirely born, that's wonderful if they have it, no judgment to them, but they have that ability to focus on their mental health and focus on enlightenment, because they can do their entire life doing that. But I think it's interesting, because it is a battlefield. We have to be able to give that to everybody, not just to some.
Chrissy, after our first 2 episodes, I made a vow to myself. I said, we will get out of our 3rd episode under an hour. So if we're going to do that, I think we each need to get to each give that sort of concluding thought about encounters. And then, folks, the way we're going to do this, to tell you what book we're reading for the next episode so that you can read along if you want. One of us each episode gets to pick a book, and we don't tell the other person about it until the episode live. This time it's my turn to tell Chrissy the book we're going to do. I'll be doing that in a minute. And then next month, she'll be doing it. But let's go back to this book for just a second, Encounters. The title of it is Experiences with Non-Human Intelligences, Explorations with UFOs, Dreams, Angels, AI, and Other Dimensions, which is a pretty good come on for people who are just like, give me a kind of an overview. And I guess I would say this. It's certainly worth reading. I wouldn't tell anyone not to read it, but I would tell them to have to not expect it to be that compelling narrative that builds from this chapter, inevitably must take you to this chapter, which has to take you to the next chapter. What it is it's an introduction of friends. It's like, hey, I have a friend here, and they're very interesting. You should meet them. And then you go to the next chapter, and it's like that friend is off the map now, and now we're on to a different friend or a different thought. And all of them are interesting, but it's not wrapped together in that rigid, let's get you on a train of knowledge here and take you on this ride. It's not a ride in that regard. It's an experience. I guess that's what I would say about it.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's not so much data, right? It's all testimony, and the people that Diana Silka has met within her own UAP research. But we have to remember she is a professor of religion, right? So she speaks. This book will speak, and rightfully so, it does very well about philosophy and religion. And that's her focus. So if you're interested in that, and that's why I did enjoy the book, because it was so different from what we were reading before to something now where I do personally enjoy philosophy, and I enjoy, religious studies. I think they're really interesting from all different types of religions. So I like her perspective. I just wish that the clarification again on who was speaking, if it was Diana or it was the person that was her guest or the person she was focusing on as a friend. Yeah, because that really confused me a lot. But besides that, I miss her in it, like you said. I wish that she was in it just a little bit more, because Diana is so wonderful as a person and as a professor. Yeah.
So maybe next time she's in LA, she'll call me up. We'll have that beer together, and then I'll report on that. All right, let's talk about what's coming up, what we're going to do. Yeah. Just to make this fun, I narrowed it down to 3 books, and I'm going to show them to you, Chrissy, and then you're going to guess which one I'm picking. Maybe. Okay. The first was Richard Dolan's UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And the reason I thought this might be a possibility is that it's at least a basic book that everybody should read. We all need, if you're going to catch up quick, you need a book that can get you there fast. You don't need the slice. You want the big picture of ufology. Richard Dolan delivers that better than anybody. He's always been fantastic at that, and he's at his best in this thing, and it's just been updated. The other possibility was Gods, Man, and War by Tom DeLonge, and is it Peter Levenda? I think that's his name. Yeah, Peter Levenda. And this is part 3 of their nonfiction part, but it's so relevant today because everybody talks about the threat narrative and things like that. This is them discussing whether we're in a bind, whether we're in a military style bind. Because remember, Tom DeLonge got briefed in on the military. And then the third one I was thinking of was, if you just want a classic, you go to Communion with Whitley Strieber. Okay? And I thought, this is a book for many people. They saw that face and they read it and they've forgotten everything that's really in it, because there's been so many years that have passed. And I thought it might be fun for us to do that. Do you have a theory on which one I'm going to choose?
Well, I have Communion. I bought it at an antique store. I was looking. Sometimes I go into antique stores and see if they have old UFO books.
I'm not picking to make it easy on you, though.
No. Tom DeLonge?
Very good. Well, here's the thing. When it comes to Whitley Strieber, it's an abduction book, and we've already done abductions with John Mack, right? And I felt like we need to give that a break, so it's not him. And even though I highly recommend UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, because like I said, if you're just looking for something to get up to speed, yeah. But I really think we're going to go with Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda with the third installment. I mean, it's kind of obscure, I admit. It's the installment number 3 of their nonfiction book series, because they also did a 3-part fiction book series. So there's a lot of books these dudes have written. But I want to know what they think mostly about where we are today, because there's all this talk about whose technology is out there, whether it's Chinese drones and whether Lockheed Martin's making these things and whether NHI is doing it. And I've been stuck in the middle of that controversy. So, my gosh, we're going to go to God's Man and War next time. What do you think?
It's so fitting. I'm in. I'm so fitting. I'd be in for the other ones too, but I've never read a book from Tom DeLonge. So this will be interesting.
It'll be interesting.
I also just like to see his style and how he decides to write too, because he's an entertainment music guy. Right. It might be very different compared
to probably no secret that Peter Levenda probably had more to do with writing that than Tom. But on the other hand, I don't know that for a fact. And Tom DeLonge is an incredibly well-read guy. I mean, he's probably read a lot more of these books than I have, for sure. So here we are at 59:49. We've done it. I want to thank you for another great show, and it's always been a pleasure.
It's true, and I wish I had my cup, our amazing cups, but I'll say cheers until next episode.
You got it.
Latin one.
All right, Chrissy, thanks so much. You folks at home, thanks for watching. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month.
Project Book Club is produced by Bryce Zabel and Tyler Stevens and is brought to you by Stellar Productions. You can learn more about us and what we do at projectbookclub.net. We appreciate you and hope you'll spread the word. See you next time, because every book you haven't read is a new one.